When I first started learning about the issue of sexual exploitation in Canada, I just kept bumping up against the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. These two things, these two crises in our country are intertwined. And as I learned more about some of the things you have spoken of colonialism, residential schools, the Indian Act, all of those things, I was heartbroken. And I was ashamed that I didn't know, that I wasn't aware, and had to ask Jesus for forgiveness. And I not only asked for that forgiveness for myself as an individual, but also for the church, because I recognized where has my church been? The churches that I've been part of never talked about this deep crisis. They'd all been silent. We'd all been silent. And yeah, how could I not have known? And these things have to change.
It's a really hard question to ask yourself, how could we not have known? Because the opposite is true too. How could we have known? Who would have told you? Where would you have learned? The information is available, but not readily passed out, if that makes sense. It's not a part of education curriculums. I did a Canadian history class in high school. It wasn't a part of that curriculum, which is funny because it's a part of Canadian history. So how could you learn? And it's hard being an Indigenous person with kind of both those perspectives, because I've always known this is a part of who I am. It's a part of what I've known since I was small. And so I've always known, and it's hard because when you're around people who don't know, you can't expect them to know, but you also think they should know. And so it's hard to be frustrated, and it's hard not to be frustrated with people. And I think it's not your fault that you don't know. You're certainly responsible now because you do know. It's every time you learn something new, you're responsible for it. When you learn something horrible like this, you're responsible for it now, particularly as a Christian. What do I do now? Because I think if you have this information and you just hold on to it and do nothing, that's when you should feel at fault. That's when you should maybe feel a bit ashamed. But not knowing is not necessarily your fault.
Yeah. Karen, you and your husband have worked, as we heard, in a leadership role with First Nations churches. What do you think Jesus would say to the church about this tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls?
I would say that Jesus would want to walk among the Indigenous people. Because that's who he always ministered to.
Yeah.
He would go to the poor, the needy, and the marginalized.
Yeah.
And he would walk among us. He would walk among the people who are maybe living on the riverbanks, in tents, in the winter. He would be found there. And many of our churches, I would say even Indigenous churches, many of us are afraid to go to those places where Jesus would be found. And we should be Jesus in this time to many of those people. We should be the hands and feet of Jesus. And I know these are very uncomfortable things to talk about. And church is a nice place to go and be happy, dress nice, sing nice songs, but we don't talk about these hard issues. Very difficult things to talk about, because somehow it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem holy. It doesn't seem like this is the place to talk about them. And yet I feel like this is the very place that this needs to be talked about. Because Jesus sends us to go. Go. He didn't say stay in the church and be comfortable and happy and nice. And he says go. And so I think that's how we need to be as a church, to come and find common ground and put aside all the fears. Nobody needs to be told that they've done wrong.
Right.
So what is the good news in places like this for families who've lost someone and they haven't been found for years? What is the good news in that place? Yeah. And how do we as a church come in and walk with them and support them and love them?
I love how you've put that. It is the good news, and how can we bring it? Yeah. So a person or a church that might be watching this video may now be wondering, how do we appropriately engage, try to make a difference in this big issue? They might be wondering where to begin. How do I start to learn more? How do I start to build relationships with Indigenous communities? I'm guessing that there are probably some do's and some don'ts. What is the posture that we should be taking as we work towards reconciliation and bringing change around all of this? Tobi, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I think accepting and loving discomfort. It means growth. I didn't experience growth spurts myself. I'm told they are very uncomfortable. But growing as a person is awkward and uncomfortable, painful. Changing our worldview is uncomfortable and painful. And I think it's important that we do that all the time. I think when we talk about what Christ did, he shook up everyone's worldview and was really radical in the time that he lived in. I think he'd be radical still. So be uncomfortable and accept that and love it, because it means that I think Christ is changing your mind, changing your worldview. And I think don't expect Indigenous people to put in more effort into your education or your change than you are putting in yourself. I've been asked to help people with their journeys, or I've been asked to help people with their education or whatever they're doing to change. And they want me to do it. They want me to teach them. They want me to change them. It's not my responsibility. It's somebody else's. It's yours, in fact, to change yourself, or to be open to change. So I think, put in that work yourself. And I think if you are directly dealing with a family who is doing that, I think when my mom was talking, what came to me is the idea of lamenting. I think Christians are generally uncomfortable with the idea of lamenting, community lamenting specifically. I know that I am, like asking people to lament with me. But that's really what people need. They want the community to lament this loss with them, to be outraged at it, to mourn a person with them.
One of the things I would encourage people to do is to find people to be in relationship with. That's what we were made for. We were made for a relationship. And many times we're so afraid of, well, I don't know them. I don't know if I'm going to do something wrong or say something wrong, or, a whole list of stuff. And I feel like they're probably feeling it just as much. That they're just as afraid of you as you are of them. I think to the part of it too, like a lot of our churches are uncomfortable with suffering.
Yeah.
And Indigenous people, that's been our whole life, suffering. And it hasn't been pretty. But we laugh a lot in the midst of all of this ugly. Yeah. We laugh lots. That's been a life-giving thing for us. And if people make fun of you, if you're hanging around with Tobi and I and we make fun of you, that means we like you. And so this is kind of how we learn to cope with some of these things. And so sometimes you think, these guys are laughing and it's just a horrible, horrible situation and they're laughing. That's the way we get through it. Mm-hmm. And you can enter that space with us, and then we go to the deeper place. Mm-hmm. You're welcome in that space. You're also welcome in that place of pain. And so relationship is so important. And we don't want people to come and fix us. They're just as broken as us. It's just ours is very evident. We don't need people, churches, missionaries, we don't need them to come and fix us. Because Jesus is the only one who can help us. And so just relationship is important. And I always think of the two things that God says are the greatest commandments: to love Him and to love others. And I feel like if we can practice those things, we would be miles from where we are, in the right direction.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think approaching this with humility as someone in the church, as the church as a whole, has got to be foundational. But yeah, just looking for love and building relationship, so key in all of this. Karen and Tobi, thank you so much. This has been invaluable to learn from you, to journey with you. We are indebted to you for being vulnerable with us and sharing your hearts so that we can gain more understanding as we try to share with you, carry with you the burden of these tragedies and work towards reconciliation. We are called to defend the weak and to uphold the cause of the oppressed. So may Jesus give us the strength and the will to do it. Thank you.